How many of you like to win? Yeah. How many of you are keeping score all the time? Yeah. Okay. I don't understand. And pardon me. I had this in here earlier this week. I'm gonna move it. As y'all know, I like soccer. That in the U.S., there's 183 days to the World Cup. If any of you care, I do. They're going to do this thing they call friendlies, and I'm like, yeah, but we're keeping score. We want to know who wins, right? By the way, we keep score in school. We know what we make. We know what the averages are. We know who the valedictorian is, the salutatorian. It's a way of winning. And in life, we keep score. Sometimes I think we keep score of the wrong things, but we keep score. And so today's verses, and I'm about to slow down to read it because we're doing David and his mighty men. A couple of these names you're going to get lessons to learn about them. There's biblical lessons for us to learn. So turn into 2 Samuel. It's the last of his story. And so the first 7 verses are about David saying goodbye. And then he emphasizes in 8 through the end of the chapter in 23, he talks about the men that were with him when he was fleeing from Saul and when he would ultimately be crowned king. He stops and just shines the light on them and says, this is who was with me through all of these days. And so we're going to look at those 4 verses and look at the 3 chiefs of the mighty men as we look forward today. These are the names of David's mighty warriors. Jehoshaphat of Bathshuath. He was a Tahkemonite. He was chief of the 3. He raised his spear against 800 men, whom he killed in one encounter. Next to him was Eleazar, son of Doaba. I messed that one up. Doaba, the Ahite, who was one of the 3 mighty warriors who was with David when they taunted the Philistines. They gathered at Pasdammim for the battle. When the Israelites retreated, Eleazar stood his ground and he struck down the Philistines till his hand grew tired and he froze to the sword. The Lord brought about a great victory that day. Said the troops returned to Eleazar, but only to strip the dead. And next to him was Shammah, son of Agee, the Herite. When the Philistines banded together at the place where there were fields full of lentils, Israel's troops fled from them. But Shammah took his stand in the middle of the field, and he defended it and struck the Philistines down. And the Lord brought about a great victory that day. It's interesting when David starts to tell this story, he tells us who was around him. I think one of the greatest things that we can ever do when we want to succeed is to know who we are around. We need to know who is around us. One of the things, and I have struggled with this in my own life, it's like you always want to be the smartest person in the room. But the reality is we need to be able to intentionally spend time with others where we are not the smartest person in the room. It used to be, especially when we had skilled craftsmen, everybody served as an apprentice. You served under somebody so that you could learn from this person who you said knows more than me. Jesus was that for the disciples. They called him rabbi. They intentionally served under somebody who knew more than they did. These 3 men, they served under David, who they realized was a great warrior, and they were willing to put themselves in that spot under him. And by the way, they would follow him in places where most of us would never go. At risk to their own lives, they said, I'll follow this person. By the way, I think you need to choose who those people are, but be willing to put yourself in that place because you can learn. I've been blessed to be around pastors that I was willing to serve with and under, because I knew as I walked with them, I could learn about how to be a pastor and how to be, in lots of cases, even a dad or a husband well. We need to know who's around us. But these gentlemen also, they weren't just following just the leader. There was another 37 men when you read through the end of the chapter. They knew who their friends were. And you need to choose them carefully. Because sometimes we get into relationships with people and they're like, I might have grown up with you, but I still need to step away from that relationship. I need to see who's true. I saw this from my 14-year-old son, or when he was 14. We'd moved to Lancaster, South Carolina. We were new in town. JC was moving from little rural Georgia to a rather large high school. The school he left, the whole school would have been in his one grade at the high school at Lancaster. How big of a shift it was. I was gone over, and people wanted it to be a good transition. They introduced me to the principal, and actually a couple of his church members were his teachers. About 2.5 weeks in, I get a phone call from the principal. I'm thinking, that child's pretty mild-mannered. Surely he hadn't done anything yet. He said, John, I wanted to tell you I've been going into the lunchroom on JC's lunch schedule. And he said he's sitting by himself with nobody around. I tell, okay. I'm like, well, I guess I get to have a conversation after football today. And JC had been, most of his whole life, he spent as a preacher's kid, okay? And so I said, so how's it going? You know, are you adjusting? He goes, well, it's challenging, but I'm doing okay. He goes on and tells me how, you know, I'm like, so you got any friends? Yeah. All right, JC, let me just fess up. I hear you eating by yourself and hadn't really eaten with anybody in over 2 weeks. He goes, Dad, how in the world do you know all this stuff? And he would go on, and this has happened much of his life. I know people. I said, well, let's just put it this way. I have ears. And he goes, you hadn't been here that long. I said, I know. I said, I already know that. I said, so explain to me what's up. And a couple of times in my life, JC has said things that were just poignant. And in both times, he was fairly young. He looks at me and he goes, Dad, he goes, everybody knows who you are. And a lot of these kids know who I am. He goes, I'm waiting to see who's going to be true. Who's going to be real. And he said, until then, I'm sitting on the corner of that table watching, choosing my friends carefully. I said, well, if you need candy to entice somebody over, let me know. But go for it, big guy. And all of a sudden, he was like, I'm like, all right, that's pretty sound. 14. These guys right here had chosen who they would follow and who would be their friends out of this allegiance to David. They would go into places that you can't imagine. They were going to be outnumbered and sought and threatened to be killed by Saul. I don't know about you, but I want that group to be committed to me in life. When we start walking through life, though, when we choose our friends carefully, we know that they're Christ followers and they're strong people. That means that we know they will be there when we need them most. Know who is around you. Be able to choose your friends wisely. Be able to sit where you can still learn. You don't always have to be the smartest person in the room, because there's still many things to learn. So we do this, and by many times defining how we're going to win. I think in our world today, they define who wins by who has the most toys at the end, right? Mark Batterson is pastor in the D.C. area. He's written Prayer Circle and a couple other books. He said, I define success this way. He says, I want to be known best and respected most by the people in my house, in my family. I want to start with that. That's how he defines success. He says, I want to be those who know me best to respect me the most. And at the end of the day, he says, I want to be famous in my own house because of how I choose to live it. In the church, so often we define success by numbers in attendance. And by the way, you want to ask me, I know how many behinds we put in seats every Sunday. They've already told me today. It's sitting up here for me. Howie, close your ears. We count success how we're doing financially. Okay, when we do that as churches all the time. Every church I've ever been in. Well, how's the money? How's the numbers, preacher? But the reality is success ought to be defined for us as a church, as individuals, about how we're seeing people transformed by their relationship with Jesus Christ. And if they aren't growing and becoming better disciples that reflect him in every way, shape, and form, or every thought and deed, that's a win. And it may not be that it's growing. Fortunately for us, we're seeing all of the above. Sometimes we have to define success in our own lives a little different. Maybe it means I don't chase the next promotion. I pondered that as I chose Jacob's ladder. We're climbing higher and higher. It's more about climbing higher in relationship to God than climbing that corporate ladder which I chased some years ago. Sometimes we need to understand how God is calling us if we're going to define who we are to succeed. And it starts by knowing who is around us. We have to deal with our adversities and our, disadvantages or limitations that we face. These mighty men who followed David around. Now, David's been anointed, but Saul had also been anointed, right? And Saul has declared that he would kill David and his men. Now, who do you think at this point has all the advantages? Saul's got more men. He's got more money. He's got better training because David and his group are moving from cave to cave, hiding in place to place. But yet every time they would meet, David's men and David would win. They took that which was described as a disadvantage, a small band of about somewhere between 50 and 100 at any given time, and they would defeat Saul's army. It's interesting. Sometimes we say, we're too small. We can't do that because this reason or that. And yet we ought to be looking at the mirror in ourselves and going, how do I take this part of my life, which somebody else says is a disadvantage or adversity, and how do I claim it and use it for success? Because in the midst of us working through those things, our other parts get stronger. I struggled over those words. And by the way, I practiced those names I don't know how many times. All right? I practiced them last night before I went to bed and stand in front of you, and I butchered them horrendously. What's funny is, y'all know I'm a numbers person. I struggled to read. I went to summer school because my reading was that deficient in the 3rd grade. It was the worst summer of my life. I wanted to be at the swimming pool. What's funny is I read and write every day of my life now. Numbers are much easier. I do math without thinking about it. But yet, and all of a sudden when I read all the time now, for the person who had to be bought Sports Illustrated back in the 70s, the highest, most expensive magazine they could buy because I liked them. We take that which is a disadvantage and it becomes an advantage for us. We say we're still not the biggest church. We're a growing church. But yet, with that, we can open our arms wide and people can be plugged in and they can be loved on and they can become part of the group faster. They can know what it means to be that way. We need to think how our disadvantages work and choose how we're going to do them. I can't imagine being outnumbered 800-1 as one of David's mighty men. But he was. He said, I'm going to fight for my king, for David, for this place, no matter what the cost. He took his disadvantages, turned it into an advantage for who he was. JC is one of the slowest human beings I've ever seen in my life. I love him dearly. He still moves slow, by the way. When he comes here, if we're late, it's his fault. And son, if you're watching, I love you, but you're slow. But yet he played all the way through high school in soccer because he learned how to outthink. He knew where the ball was going. He stood in the middle of my defense on soccer continuously and played physical. He was physical because he was 6 feet, just shy of 200 pounds, all muscle. But he was ahead of you with his brain, even with the best players. And so he was always in the right spot. And so you take that which maybe you aren't the best at and you grow in other areas. No, we don't have a fancy sign. We don't have all the technology. But we can interact and create with people. We take that which is a disadvantage and make it even better. And so God uses those things and puts us together. We see that when all of a sudden there's 2 people left in a field and an army coming as they come at Eleazar. And he says, this is the place where we'll go and we'll move forward. Last thing on this is that every time these people make an example, they continually move forward. 2 different times in that, we see where the armies retreat and one of these mighty men is left to stand the ground in the field. They're still trying to move forward in life. And they knew how and when they wanted to move forward. They thought, because they knew our goal is to make David king, right? And so they were hiding in the hills in one of the earlier stories in Samuel. And they're hiding, and Saul decides he has to go do number 2. That's the best I can do. Everybody know what I'm talking about, right? So if I had just been a foot soldier and I have to do my business, the army keeps marching, I got to do my business and catch up. But when Saul, the king, stops, everybody stops, right? Saul wandered into the one cave that David and his mighty men are hiding in. I can't imagine what the lookout is doing when he's standing in this cave and he goes, the column's stopping, y'all. To the back of the cave, to the back of the cave. As he slides back into the shadows, he's like, the king is coming to this cave. All of a sudden, he starts to take care of nature. And his men are going, kill him now. This is what we have been waiting for. And there's 2 things. I'm reminded that the whole army is still outside the cave. Right? So if you kill him, where are you going? But the other part is that David knew that he had been anointed by the prophet and by God. And he would not take the throne that way. And he trims off just a little piece of his garment. And he ultimately sends it back to him to let him know, I was there, I could have. But my God said, I can't. He basically apologized for trimming off a piece of his robe. He knew how and what success looked like. David knew where he was going. He understood what God had called him to. And these men knew that as well. But David knew exactly how he was supposed to get there. And it wasn't by a trick in the middle of a dark cave. So we keep moving forward. We have faith like a prophet. I think it's verse 11 that it says that he's standing in the field and he's fighting. And he's fighting so long and so hard that when it drops and it's finally over, his hand is still like frozen to the sword. It's like when you hold on to the chainsaw and it runs and runs and runs. It's like, can I ever get my fingers off of this? The vibrations, it's just clung there. Even when it's challenging, you move forward trying to follow God. Then it starts to look like success. It starts to look like that which is we've been called to. So we need to know who's around us. We need to understand and own our stuff, our disadvantages, our adversities that come in life, because it's going to happen. Alexander Maley, it ain't all going to be perfect. As much as your mom and your dad want it to be, it will not. I'm sorry. Keep working. Keep going forward. For those of you who are here, as we get a little older, I won't call any of you old today. That's just today. Guess what? We know life isn't always easy, is it? And so how we move forward with faith in Christ to follow him, just as David's men followed David and God. We have to keep moving in faith. And we have to work at it every day, taking the steps forward of being who we are called to be. That's what success looks like. We will not win every time, as much as I dislike that. But I know if I follow by faith, knowing who's around me, and trying to follow God through the ups and the downs, then people will know, not just me, but who I follow and who I love in Jesus Christ. Let me pray for you today. Heavenly Father, let us see those where we sit in your plan. Let us see how you have orchestrated and put all of the people and the situations we're in, that you know them and you are using them. Let us move forward following you. And may you deliver great victories around us as we follow you faithfully. Thank you for your Son, Lord. Amen.